4 is a four-part drama adapted from a Japanese novel by Gregory Burke, the very talented, illustrious Gregory Burke. It centers around Chris O'Neill and Michelle O'Neill, husband and wife, who are both in, Chris is a detective in the Scottish police, and his wife was in the police department, in the police profession down in London. And they have a missing daughter. Their teenage daughter's been missing for quite some time. And we meet them in episode 1, basically in the waiting room of the morgue in Edinburgh. And they've been alerted that a teenage body of a girl that fits the description of the daughter has been found. And they're there waiting to go and identify the body. And I think it just that and the thriller and the mystery of this thing expands out from that central point, from that family drama, if you will. And a cold case from 15 years ago, a missing girl case, bubbles up for Chris, and his older brother, who's much, much higher up in the police department and is connected much more to the political world of Scottish politics and has great ambitions, much more ambitious than Chris. There's a very complicated past between Chris and his brother. And as the story goes forward, Chris gets more and more drawn into how all of these events and stories and mysteries connect and intersect. And Chris becomes very driven to find the truth about what's going on with his wife. There's a problem in his marriage. There's been a secret in his marriage that Michelle has held from Chris for many years. His brother is involved in things that Chris does not. He has a gut feeling about that something's not right. And there's also this mystery of a missing girl from 15 years ago that comes back and gets opened up again. So it's a very quite complicated and intersected thriller drama, crime drama about family and politics and a search to find the truth. I found very interesting about what Gregory's written is that, the character of Chris really does straddle his own personal anguish in his life and this horrible reality he's living in, where his daughter is missing and he doesn't know if she's safe or alive even. And at the same time, all these other cases start to come up for him. And it's almost like the universe, as this happens in life a lot, the universe all sort of aligns in a certain way. And why are all these things happening at the same time in my life? And whether it's his kind of grief that he's dealing with about his missing daughter, or the problems he's having in his marriage, or the problems he's had in his career, because his career is kind of stalled and he's kind of in a dead-end job as a detective at this point. He should be much higher up than he is. And so he's kind of at a crisis point in his life. And all these things coalesce in a strange way that he can't turn away from, And I just thought that was a really interesting construction of a drama that's not just this case of the week or mystery to be solved. It's a quite layered and very sort of psychological depiction of a detective and what he's going through. It's nice to not have to wield a scalpel and be in rubber gloves, and scrub caps and all that stuff. And, I'd always wanted to play a detective or a policeman. I've never done it. I was quite excited about the idea of playing a detective. It's something I'd always wanted to try. But again, you have to wait for the right script. I've been offered roles of detectives in the past and it never felt right, or it felt more perfunctory or much more procedural. And I'm always drawn to something that has a heart, has a real soul to it. And I feel like Chris has this real soul, as a character. I actually met up with a detective and talked to him for quite a long time, and he came to the set to visit us, this real Scottish detective. And it was very interesting meeting him because, for some reason I thought detectives would be quite bombastic and big personality and sort of forceful. And they're actually quite subdued, quite sort of under the radar people who are great people. They're great with people. They're great at, talking to people and sort of being quite unassuming. So that felt like a good hook for me. And it's not what I expected And apparently, to be a good detective, you have to be those things. I think Chris has those qualities. Well, part of the thing I loved about this is it never stops switching and changing and twisting and turning. So you're never, as an audience, allowed to settle into what you think is going on. There's always going to be a new development, a new surprise, a new complication that comes in, and it is very intense. I'm glad you described it that way. It's quite tense and unsettling at times, and quite dark. It's quite a dark show, but very smart. And I think I don't know. I just think people are gonna. It's a real roller coaster for people, and I think as episode 3 and 4 go in, it really ratchets up in quite an intense way. It comes to a head in a very interesting, surprising way that I think will be quite satisfying for people. You'll realize retroactively once you get towards the end, how the things that you saw happen in episode 1 and 2, how they come to fruition. My big thing was, I can't say this to Ben, but it was joking, but not really joking, is that this thing had to pass the Neil McKidd test. Neil McKidd's my dad, and he watches every single crime drama that exists. So he's an expert, right? So he's the sort of dad who'll sit on the sofa and he'll go like, episode 2, he'll go, I know who did it. I don't need to watch it to the end. I was like, I said, we need to pass the Neil McKidd test. We need to keep my dad guessing right to the very end. And I think we've done that. Ben and our cinematographer really worked hard to give this thing a cinematic feeling that feels quite sophisticated, and beautiful to look at, but also quite, it's very sort of David Fincher-esque, in the way that they shot it with these kind of static frames and interesting framing and beautiful lighting. I think the fact that it's a family drama with a big, Chris O'Neill and Michelle's marriage has basically broken down when we meet them because of reasons that are complicated, and both of them are at fault. So there's the heart of the thing is about this family and dealing with this missing daughter and dealing with these lies that have been told to each other, and how that has eroded at the trust and the connection of the relationship, and can they salvage their relationship from that? And I think that feels very human and very relatable for people, other than it just being about, who did the murder of the week or something like that, So, and I think you're right. I think the fact that there's this whole almost satirical look at political structures and how that all is connected to power structures through our society, and how Chris O'Neill is he's at the bottom of the food chain. He's kind of the everyman. He's kind of the audience. He's us sitting on our sofas going, why are we not getting told the truth in our social lives and in our political discourse in our countries? It feels like, and I think that's where conspiracy theories get born, is there's this feeling that we all have that it's like, why am I not I feel like I'm not being told the whole truth by our leaders, So I think Gregory's really tapped into a lot of quite primal things about where our society is at the moment, I've been wanting to come back home to do something and to shoot something and to be kind of almost back at the home pitch, for quite some time, and just nothing had ever quite been the right fit. And it was just lovely. It was lovely working with Scottish actors again. Many of these actors I'd worked with before. Some of them I hadn't worked with Alex Burns or Brian McCarty before. I'd worked with James Cosmo a lot over the past. And everybody so professional, so much fun. Everybody comes at it with the right attitude. Nobody takes it too seriously, but seriously enough. Scottish crews are some of the best crews in Europe, and I've worked with most of them. Some of them I'd worked with on Trainspotting and Small Faces, who are all in the crew here. So it really, really did feel like a homecoming for me, and it was quite an emotional experience for me, actually, coming home after all these years and getting to work and be welcomed back in. So I think I was initially a little bit worried, like, people are going to be like, you've been away too long, you're not welcome here, I was a little bit worried that might happen, but not at all. Within less than 12 hours, I felt like no time had passed and I was just back home seeing folk I hadn't seen in a long time and getting to work with them and create something that I think is quite compelling, and worth watching. Me and James Cosmo worked with Gregory about 10 years ago on a one-off drama called One Night in Emergency. And since then, me and Gregory stayed in contact, and we've been wanting to do something again together, something slightly bigger, on a slightly bigger scale. And then this thing just happened to be here, and also just happened to be in the window of time that I actually have off each year. So all this kind of stars kind of aligned, so sometimes when the universe gives you that, you can't say no to it. My whole life has been Scotland until work took me away. So I get homesick consistently. I'm watching TV shows that are set in Scotland. My pal Ian Robertson just did this walk-in show that I was actually in when we shot 6-4, and I watched that, and I sat looking on Rightmove all the time, looking at houses in the Highlands. So I'm a very homesick expat. Let's just say. There's a shop not far from here that does sell Iron Brew and all that, so I'm not too bad. I'm not too, and they actually sell haggis as well. They've started selling haggis there, so I'm feeling okay about that side of things. It used to be that like big American productions would come to Scotland and use it as a location for a couple of weeks and then go off again. I think the fact that homegrown stories are being written more and put out there that set in Scotland is really great, because there's so many great actors, there's so many good writers, brilliant crew folk, and there's so much talent in Scotland that I think people are finally wising up to that there's a lot of stories to be told there, and the talent in the country to tell them and depict them really in a compelling way. So long may it continue. I mean, I've got a few projects that I'm trying to develop that would be specifically shooting back in Scotland and telling Scottish stories. Some of them would be set up in the north of Scotland, because that's kind of where I'm from. So I think the more and more, it's a domino effect, isn't it? One thing goes in Scotland and then something else goes, and hopefully that'll just keep building, and it should, because there's the talent here to support it. I'm very passionate about the more rural stories and rural parts of Scotland, because that's what I grew up with. Glasgow and Edinburgh seemed like a million miles away when I was a wee boy, and it was hard. I wanted to be an actor, and it was hard to get access to it because I was living up in the sticks. So it's nice to see stories being told in those more remote places. We're still just wrapping up season 19 of Grey's Anatomy. I'm about to direct, I think, my 31st episode. It's the penultimate episode of the season. So I'll be starting prep on that in about 2 weeks. We'll finish the season. I'm trying to, we've got a few projects that I might be doing back in Europe this summer. And I'm also developing some projects that I hope will come to fruition that take place in Scotland as well.